Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with senior political correspondent David Drucker. And David, this past week we saw the Democrats really struggle to reach a consensus on basically any part of their legislative agenda. What do you think that says about the way the Democrats have approached governing with such thin majorities?
Well, I think their eyes are a little big for what they're able to digest. Look, it's natural for Democrats and Republicans to come to Washington and want to do big things, particularly in the last 20, 25 years or so. But even before that, you're elected to Congress, you're elected president, and you think of all these amazing things you want to do. You're going to make the country better. You're going to finally do that thing that nobody else would do. You're going to be bold and ambitious. But Democrats in 2021 don't have the numbers for ambitious legislation. Now, look, I think, eventually they're likely to pass another big spending bill, and I still think they'll find a way to do this $1 trillion in bipartisan infrastructure. It got nearly 20 votes from Republicans in the U.S. Senate. But the struggle since the initial COVID relief bill has been that they're trying to pass legislation with a 5-seat majority in the House and a 0-seat majority in the Senate that exists because of Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote, that it's simply very difficult to do. And just by contrast here, I remember covering the Congress in 2009 and 2010 when they had a 60-seat Senate majority, filibuster-proof. They had, 40-something, some odd seat majority in the House of Representatives. And they did get a big thing done. They were able to pass the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but they almost didn't get it done. It was a heavy lift, and they wanted to pass a cap and trade, sort of climate change related piece of legislation that got through the House and died in the U.S. Senate because there weren't the votes. So you look back on that period and realize how hard it was to do big things, and then you look at the fall of 2021 as we're speaking here, and their struggle to do big things. But you understand why. They really don't have the votes for what they're trying to do. They'll end up doing something, I think, just because the idea of doing nothing is going to end up being more unpalatable. But the reason Senators Manchin from West Virginia and Sinema from Arizona are able to bring everything to a halt is because Democrats in the Senate need all 50 votes to get anything done. They can't spare one single vote if Republicans don't help, and they're not going to help on this. And in the Senate, even though there are fewer centrists than there are progressives or liberals, there are enough centrists, more than enough, with that small 5-seat majority to gum the whole thing up.
One issue that remains unresolved after this past week is the debt ceiling. The Democrats initially had to back off what they wanted to do, which was tie it to the government funding bill. What do you think about their strategy so far for handling the debt ceiling?
Well, I still can't figure out if they actually believe what Mitch McConnell is telling them, which is Republicans are not going to provide any votes to raise the debt ceiling. And eventually, I think they may come around to believing McConnell, but they should, because he won't, and Republicans won't. So in the House, I think you're going to get enough Democrats to raise the debt ceiling without any Republican votes. And I don't think it's going to be a problem there. So the real rub is in the U.S. Senate. Democrats were talking about doing what they wanted to call a clean debt ceiling increase. The problem with that is it'll run afoul of the McConnell doctrine, which is we're in the minority, we're not giving you the votes. I mean, McConnell's doctrine is really interesting. The debt ceiling is really important. It really needs to be passed. It's urgent, but we're not helping because we're in the minority, so it's up to you. So some Democrats said, well, what if we just do a clean debt ceiling increase legislation that's not tied to anything else? The problem under the Senate rules is that it would take 60 votes to open debate on the bill and 60 votes to close debate on the bill. And as far as voters are concerned, voting to open and close debate on a bill is just as good as voting for a bill. So even though on final passage, Democrats could pass the debt ceiling with 50 votes plus the vice presidential tiebreaker, this whole scheme isn't going to work as far as the McConnell doctrine is concerned. So now Democrats in the Senate are back to square one, and what Republicans are telling them is you stick it in reconciliation, because reconciliation, we use that term because It's a special budgetary bill that's protected from the filibuster, so Democrats don't need any Republican help, not to open debate, close debate, pass it, nothing. And that's what Republicans in the Senate keep telling Chuck Schumer, the leader, and his members. And some of them, I think, are starting to understand that McConnell is very serious about this, but I don't think some of them really get it yet.
And finally, it's early in the process, but some new congressional maps, some drafts of maps have started to emerge. What can you tell from these early maps so far about how redistricting will affect the midterms?
Well, I think we always approached the decennial redistricting process and reapportionment process as one that was going to benefit Republicans overall. In other words, the states that are gaining House seats because of population shifts are Republican-leaning states, and that's the case. The states losing House seats are Democratic-leaning states, and that's the case. So now we're starting to get the maps, both of the brand new districts that didn't exist and new lines for existing districts. And I don't think we're seeing anything that's all that surprising, meaning Republicans are doing quite well when it comes to boundaries for new seats and when it comes to the existence, the creation of brand new districts, because a state like Texas is picking up 2 new members of the House of Representatives because of a gain in population. New York is losing 1 seat in the House of Representatives because of a loss in population. The interesting thing here is in some of these states where we expected maybe a stronger movement in the direction of Republicans in terms of the number of seats drawn to elect Republicans, the number of seats drawn to elect a Democrat, are not quite as strong or as lopsided, let's say, as we thought might be the case. On the other hand, we've just seen in a state like Colorado a draft of a map that's been introduced where Democrats, it's really a blue state now, it's really not a swing state. Democrats win up and down the ballot there. They win presidential races, but they have a commission, and the commission is pretty evenly divided among Democrats and Republicans. So instead of having a map more lopsided toward the Democrats, new districts and district lines drawn to elect Democrats, it's pretty even. Democrats have a slight edge, but maybe not the edge they might have had. But I would caution that it's a little too early in the process to know exactly how this is going to end up in the end, other than to say, I don't think we've seen anything yet to disabuse us of the prediction that redistricting overall is going to end up being a net plus for Republicans.
Well, David, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more reporting from David and the rest of the political team at WashingtonExaminer.com.